Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Bowles. I'm the Executive Director of the Water Education Foundation, which helped to organize this wonderful conference. I want to welcome everyone to the conference. We have folks from California and across the U.S., from such states as Nebraska, Colorado, the state of Washington. I want to especially thank the people who came from far distances, people from Brazil, New Zealand, and Australia, Oman, China, Japan, India, Nepal, Germany, Slovenia, Uganda, Chile, Spain, Israel, Denmark, the Netherlands, and my native land of Canada, just to name a few. Altogether, we have more than 200 presentations for you over the next few days and presenters from 30 countries. So we are calling this the Groundwater Olympics. So we're very excited that everyone made it here. So at the Water Education Foundation, we believe that it's important for the link between science and policy to be strong, and we hope that this conference will help to further that connection. You can find out more about the foundation at our exhibit table if you're interested. There are some handouts in your folders also of some of our events and publications on our website. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for helping with this event: UC Water Security and Sustainability Research Initiative, the Almond Board of California, University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources, Chronic Moskovitz, Tiedemann, and Girard, and Crop Production Services. Our exhibitors, whose names if you saw the rolling PowerPoint, that was McGeorge School of Law, Best Inc., Groundwater Resources of California, Envirotech, DHI, and Water Technology Alliance. And thanks to those who sponsored student scholarships, Best and Krieger, and Crop Services Productions. So just a few housekeeping items for you over the next few days. If you see red ribbons on name badges, and they say staff, not speaker, those are the people who are either from the Water Education Foundation or UC Davis, and they can help you with downloading your PowerPoints or with any questions that you might have. Also, you have drink tickets tucked into your name badges. The pink ones are for tonight's reception. The green ones are for tomorrow's reception. Also tonight, I hope you're going to join me. We have a very special screening of a documentary made by my friend Ian James of the Desert Sun in Southern California and his cohorts at USA Today. The documentary is called Pumped Dry: The Global Crisis of Vanishing Groundwater, and it's only been screened at 4 film festivals: Palm Springs, Washington, D.C., Sonoma, and my hometown of Toronto. And now it's going to be screened in Burlingame, so we're very excited. And it's a documentary that goes across the globe, showing groundwater issues across the globe. It's about an hour long, not too long, and we're hoping to Skype in the documentary filmmaker as well, so it should be really fun. So that's going to be at 7:30 tonight after the reception and posters. So please join me for that if you're not too tired by then. I also wanted to let you know that Lester Snow, our planned lunch speaker, sends his regrets for not being able to attend today. He has a meeting with the governor, so we couldn't let him not go to that. Instead, we have Michael Kajparski, the director of the Wheeler Water Institute at the Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment at the University of California, Berkeley. So we're very glad that he will be addressing us at lunch. I also want you to know that if you're tweeting, please use the hashtag #AgGroundwater. Our Twitter at the foundation is @WaterEDFDN, so we'll be posting some updates there. And now I'm very happy to introduce to you Thomas Harder, whom most of you know. He's a groundwater expert. He was appointed the Robert M. Hagan Endowed Chair in Water Management and Policy at the University of California, Davis in 2007. Thomas is the mastermind behind this conference. And we at the foundation are lucky to count him among our board members. So please welcome Thomas Harder.
Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome to this incredible opportunity to meet and mingle and exchange ideas on a very unique but very important idea: agriculture and groundwater and agriculture. I wanted to thank Jennifer and her crew, Sue, Beth, Susan, Lisa, Vanessa, and Sydney, for putting this all together. They're holding this all together and are bringing us here. I wanted to thank Johanna, who's helped me with a lot of the logistics on my end. I also wanted to thank David Rudolph from University of Waterloo, who is my co-chair and who has been the cheerleader of all of this and the instigator to do this one more time. We've come together, and many of you were here in 2010 when we gathered for the first time. I'd also like to thank the Program Council, who has been incredibly helpful and who's really been putting in the ideas for this conference, for the sessions in this conference, and for many of the speakers that are here at this conference. And you will see most of the Program Council members moderating the sessions throughout this conference. So why this conference? For me personally, when we did the first round of this conference, and this is still true today, I go to a lot of groundwater conferences where there's very little agricultural context. And I go to some of the agricultural conferences where there is a big water context, but it's really just surface water, and there's very little groundwater context at most of the agricultural conferences. And so when we did this the first time in 2010, and the reason why we're doing this again now is there's really not a venue for us that are working at this nexus between groundwater and agriculture, to meet, to exchange ideas, to link between the many different aspects and facets of that nexus between groundwater and agriculture. The science, linking the science with the policy, linking the quantity supply with the quality, linking it to the water energy nexus, linking it to foods, and making these cross linkages and having conversations across these various topics. But the other piece also is this is an opportunity for us to meet from many different local places. Groundwater is often considered a local problem. It's best managed at the local scale, as we've heard at the last conference. But the fact that locally, around the globe, we have the same problems is amazing to me, and it's really a place that says we need to sit together, share our experiences, share what we have learned, look for opportunities that are there, learn from those opportunities, but also understand what these challenges at many local places mean for our global economy and our global health. That's why we're here. We've come a long ways in the last 6 years here in California. We've passed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. We are engaging agriculture in an irrigated lands regulatory program to reduce nitrate loading to groundwater. The European Union has come across its first deadline on the EU Water Framework Directive to get to good water status across all waters in the European Union. So what I challenge you with for the next 3 days is look for your colleagues at another place. See and hear what they have learned. Look at what opportunities are out there that may be applying to your work, whether it's in policy or in science. Come to the final plenary session on Thursday and bring what you've learned in these 3 days with you, and share where do we go next? What do you want to do next with what you've learned here and with the opportunities that you see here? And what challenges do we need to tackle next? For those of you that are working on the science and technical side, what does your work mean for our policy and decision makers? What can you share with them about your work? And for those that are in policy and decision making, what do you need to know from the scientists? What do you need? What demands or what needs do you have on the technical side? With that said, today we're going to start with a highlight on California, and I want to welcome Glenda Humiston, my super boss, Vice President of University of California for the agri-natural resources side of the university. She's really at the pinnacle of that link between science and communities. She oversees the Agricultural Experiment Station and Cooperative Extension within the University of California system, which works throughout all counties in California to extend the knowledge that's generated at the university to farmers and work hand in hand with farmers on management practices. She has a lot of experience in the public policy sector. She has been the Deputy Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment at the USDA. She managed the Sustainable Development Institute at the 2002 World Summit for Sustainable Development in South Africa, as well as the World Water Forum in Mexico City in 2006. Welcome, Glenda Humiston.
Thank you, Thomas. It is really a pleasure to be here, and it's really a pleasure to have a chance to moderate this wonderful panel that we've got up here. To set the stage for that, I've been asked to just give a little broad overview of what is going on in California currently around water issues, and set the stage for these folks to dig a little deeper into our Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and all the efforts around that. So one thing I think everybody here knows is that water insecurity and climate change are huge challenges that we are literally facing throughout the world. As you can see from these maps of the U.S. on the side, every single year there is a drought somewhere. Might be in the east one year, might be out here, might be multi-year out here, as we're currently suffering in California and other parts of the West. But it's not just the droughts the issue. One of the reasons I love this map of California is this is some work that a partnership of the State Energy Commission, UC Davis, and others have done, where they're really trying to look at how several vulnerabilities interact with each other so that we can really target where we need to put efforts and actions and investment. So this particular map where you're seeing the dark red there is where the worst intersections of climate vulnerability, land use vulnerability, socioeconomic, and crop vulnerability intersect. It's a great planning tool for us as we try to target our resources and our efforts. We at the University of California, as Thomas mentioned, have offices throughout the state working on this, and a host of advisors and specialists and researchers, and perhaps most important of all, our cooperators, the farmers and the landowners and the partners we work with in the field, often on joint projects, and the various universities throughout the system. Specifically within that is our Water Resources Institute. And for those of you that really do want to get a sense of all the research going on throughout the California system, this is a great website. This is part of the national network supported by the Federal Water Resources Research Act of 1964. So we get funding from USGS to maintain this on behalf of California to help coordinate all the different research going on around water, but also to interact with our partners in other states so we can share information and actually facilitate a lot of joint multi-state research. And that research has really developed a great deal of new technologies, new knowledge, water efficiencies, ways to improve irrigation, reduce water use, and measure and model and so forth and so on. The knowledge and the tools we've got out here now compared to even 5 or 10 years ago are truly extraordinary. But one of the unintended consequences that we need to keep in mind as we think about water management is as we irrigate with less water on the surface, we are not recharging groundwater in the ways our good old flood irrigation used to do. So what impact is that having on groundwater basins? Just to show you the complexity of the issue. And there you go. There's the complexity of the issue. All too often, the various people working on water are coming at it from just feeling or seeing or studying one tiny bit of the overall picture. And if they're not communicating, well, then how do we actually develop that shared understanding of the problem, find some agreement on recommendations, and then actually work together seeking action? We got to rip those blindfolds off the folks. That's led to some efforts here in the state I want to share with you, one of which is our California Roundtable on Water and Food Supply that was launched in 2010. This is one of those efforts that brings together a very diverse array of stakeholders, many of whom argue with each other an awful lot. But one of the reasons this roundtable works, and others like it, is that when we're in the room for the roundtable meeting and the door is closed, what goes on in the room stays in the room. The only thing that comes out after several meetings are the consensus items that are in very brief reports with some recommendations. But it really allows some folks that truly do have very different opinions and goals and ideas to really dig into those and work at it. It's been a great effort. University of California is just one of many, many, many partners in this. Several state agencies, federal agencies, our agricultural community, our environmental community, and others. We've now published about 4 reports. A 5th one is due to hit the press at any time. We were hoping it would be here in time for this, but it's probably a few days out. They range from the very first one, which was just about water conservation, how to be more efficient, how to conserve water. The second one really got into new and different ways to look at storage and retention. The third one, we wanted to look at connectivity. What does that mean? And then, of course, the 4th one really dug into groundwater using the Kings River Basin as an example. So, some examples of that kind of work, this is from the second one, where we really are looking at how we are able to manage upper watershed health could have a huge impact on the water that comes off of some of these watersheds for use in the valley. And this is important. 9 to 16% more water off of our Sierra and Cascade mountain systems is huge when you consider they produce about 60% of the water that California utilizes. The third one, as I mentioned, the connectivity, was really trying to see how can we design some resilient water infrastructure and new ways to work. And that led us into the connectivity approach, where we're really trying to tie together upper and lower watershed, surface and groundwater, find some alignment of governance structures and tools, and then improving stakeholder engagement, all of which hopefully will lead to better investment. Concurrent with that effort, the state government was developing the California Water Action Plan, which is a very broad-based document that really gets into 10 recommendations on how California as a whole can improve its water management, both surface, ground, and everything in between. One of the things that's now coming at a cross-section with the state government effort and the California Roundtable's effort is a focus on how can we bring those two conversations together and look at moving forward action. Because there's been a lot of talk, there's been a lot of reports, there's a lot of recommendations out there. How do we move to action? So this is just photos I took of some of the meeting documents up on the wall, looking at which institutions and organizations have to be involved. How do they fit geospatially when we start looking at management? And what are the different time scales they represent? Because some of this work requires some sequencing. Another group that's going on right now, and this is important too, this Working Landscapes Action Team, which was formed as part of our State Economic Summit. And it was formed largely because when the very first State Economic Summit occurred in 2012, 500 of some of our best and brightest in California. And at the end of the day, you would have thought the California economy was located on a barren asteroid in outer space. Not a word, hardly a word about water or soil or natural resources or agriculture or anything related to it. So because of that, many of us felt that just was not the conversation we needed to have moving forward. We spent the next year lobbying very hard at the regional forums leading up to the next state forum to charter a Working Landscapes Action Team. And these numbers are important because all too often, agriculture gets overlooked. That's, as Thomas said earlier, that's one of the most important reasons to have this conversation about agriculture and groundwater, because it often gets overlooked. And some of that's just because of the way we look at numbers. I can't begin to tell you how frustrated, even angry I get when I hear very intelligent people making extremely stupid statements like, and I've heard this way too often, and if there's some of you in the audience that have said it, please listen now. California agriculture is only 2% of the state's GDP. Why should we even bother with it? Okay, excuse me. That is an extremely stupid statement. First of all, GDP is not a good measure of anything. And second of all, it doesn't take into account all of the support and multipliers around ag. So we actually chartered a group to look at what really is the value of ag. Because at that first economic summit, they had the very traditional pie chart. Wholesale, retail, transportation, entertainment, etc. You don't see ag, you don't see natural resources in that. It's all in how you tease the data out. What we found using 2012 data, this was a report that was done, is that working landscapes, of which ag is over half, 318 billion in direct sales alone. And I can tell you that number does not really include recreation on rural working landscapes, which is a huge, huge number. You throw a little bit of multiplier on that, you're talking almost a third, perhaps more than a third of the state's economy. Now, that has an impact, and that is causing people to look at this much more closely. So one of the things we've got going on right now, again, bringing the various players together, two working groups for the State Economic Summit that are now collaborating with the Roundtable, the state, and others, one specifically looking at ecosystem services and how they interact with water, land use, etc. In fact, that meeting is happening just in a couple, in fact, it's next week maybe, July 6th, if that's next week. And then a separate group that's looking purely at groundwater, and this is going to be in October. And this is where, again, we're organizing meetings to bring all the various players to the table, not unlike what you're doing today with exchanging information, but in this case, a smaller group and including a lot of policymakers to talk about what can we do, how can we move forward. It's really about, and this is from the connectivity report, changing how we look at these systems. Quit the stovepiping, start communicating, start measuring and analyzing all of this in a comprehensive fashion, and really find that connectivity approach. Which leads us to, last but not least, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act here in California, something very new a few years ago. I'm not going to go into details on this. I did throw the map up there of where we sort of are, and that's available on this great website at California Groundwater, which I urge you to go take a look at. The state has put up. But we've got 3 expert speakers here who are going to dive into that a little bit, as well as groundwater in general. So with that, let me offer the stage to them. I'm not going to go into a large biography introduction of them. If you look in your package, you're going to see that all the speakers' biographies are there. But first up, I will have Karen Ross, who is currently serving as Secretary for our California Department of Agriculture, appointed by Governor Jerry Brown. Following her will be another Governor Brown appointment, Gordon Burns, who is the Undersecretary for the California Environmental Protection Agency. And then last, but very much not least, Perry Klassen, who is with the East San Joaquin Valley Agricultural Water Quality Coalition, who's going to really bring us that on-the-ground perspective. So with that, Karen, I'm going to turn the mic over to you. You consider whatever. It's up to you.
Well, I need to get my energy going, so I feel like I need to stand up. But that was really good. Give her a hand. And I'm not sure that I have anything left to add to that, because she gave such a comprehensive framework of what's going on in California. Just the cone of silence here, what she said about that stupidity of the only 2%. I can't say that, but
I can.
it's very.
That's why I left government service.
It's
so
very frustrating. Yeah. But I am not a scientist, but I'm probably the biggest cheerleader for science, because I know how important it is for us to have good policy. And for us to make good policy sends the signals to the marketplace that really unleash innovation. So I'm going to give more of a very high-level overview of what led to the passage of SGMA. But I want to step back for a moment and really reinforce something that Thomas said, because it is so important. If we stay where we are and only work on the problems from the perspective of where we are, we will never get to the long-lasting solutions that we need. We are part of a bigger world. Now, given the political situation today, you might think that we all need to resort back to our tribes and only stay where we are. But I'm here to tell you, after spending last week in Israel, how important it is for us to find all those places that share very similar challenges and the opportunities that will come to all of us if we do this. Yesterday, I was listening to NPR, and They were talking about the 10th anniversary of the Arab Spring. And they said this was about a lot of people who didn't have jobs, who didn't have hope, who literally just wanted a job. They wanted bread. And they just stopped and they said, literally, they just wanted bread. Food security does not happen without water. Yes, agriculture, food production, uses the vast majority of the world's water supply. And we know that groundwater, regardless of the continent, is an important supply of that water for food production. We also know that 40% of the global landmass is on dry lands. Mediterranean climates, other places that we could say, no, people should not be there, but in fact, a large proportion of the world's population is living on those dry lands and has to find a way to farm. We know that farming and food production can be the first step out of poverty, and all of this goes together for preventing civil unrest. Yes, I'm here to tell you that we can be a part of delivering world peace. So remember that and keep up the good work. Here in California, we have known that historically groundwater in some communities can make up as much as 100% of the water supply for drinking in many communities. We know that historically in California, groundwater has made up approximately 30% of the water supply for food production and agricultural production. Our last drought, after many years of cutbacks in our surface water supply because of court decisions, regulatory changes, the understanding of making up for environmental impacts that we didn't realize were happening when we built our system, that as we lost more and more of our surface water, we were becoming even more dependent on groundwater. So that instead of 30%, moving up to 46%, which is what we had used for groundwater in previous droughts, in this current drought, groundwater, we are relying on groundwater for about 60% of our total water supply. In 2014, and this is because of the UC Davis Economic Impact Report that we did, we had approximately a 35% reduction in the delivery of surface water to agricultural communities. That means 8.7 million acre feet. We compensated for that shortage with 6 million acre feet of groundwater, but we still had a deficit of 2.7 million acre feet. That resulted in a $2.7 billion economic impact, the loss of 21,000 jobs, the fallowing of 540,000 acres. That is not sustainable. And the fear was that in 2013, when we started talking about should we pursue sustainable groundwater management, was that pursuing something as complex as that in the heat of a crisis, a drought, could lead to faulty policy. We were taking a big step. Governor Brown had convened a task force when he was governor in 1976 that had laid out recommendations. He got beat up over that. And so one of the most important meetings we had early in the year was with the governor about, is this the right time to pursue that? I am not ashamed to say that I was very strong in supporting pursuing legislation at that time, because I felt that if we did not pursue sustainable groundwater management legislation, we were going to lose the reservoir that would mean we could continue to be a contributor to food security for the future, that we had to take advantage of that moment. But I also knew that in this administration, because we're taking a more integrated resource management approach, we're trying to get people out of the silos. We had done the Water Action Plan. We had the people and the intellect, and he's sitting right here, to help us write good policy. So it passed, and now the hard work has begun. I will tell you that having spent a lot of time with many of the agricultural leaders who are also leaders in their irrigation districts across the state, this is hard. If it was easy, we would have done it before. And I've said this from the beginning, one of the most important sciences to be at the table is social sciences. We are asking people from all perspectives in a local community to come together to develop a governance structure that they all trust, that they all feel their voice is a part of, and that they will be willing to go along with the decisions of that governance body. There is nothing easy about that, because once they develop the governance structure, this is the group with community input, scientific input, lots of data, will then create the plan. And at the end of the day, decisions about how much water you have for your farm and your livelihood, how much water is available that's clean and safe for your drinking, how much water is available to create the atmosphere for the reason you wanted to live in a rural area. Everyone's going to be impacted. There's nothing easy about that. But I believe that we have the tools in place, the support from the Department of Water Resources in providing data, modeling, satellite imaging. The department is also providing in-kind facilitation for all of the groups that are trying to do this. We're working very hard to help at the local level with the funding issues, because at the end of the day, because of our 218 problem, being able to spend money on this has to have a direct nexus to what they're collecting the fees for. There are big challenges around doing this, institutional challenges, legal challenges, financial challenges. But at the end of the day, science must feed into the policy that we're setting. And that the magic happens when we come together for the right investment to create the right infrastructure, that we have policy that gives the right signals for behavioral change, for marketplace change, for innovation changes. But one of the most important things we can do working together is to create the incentive packages to help make this come together. Doing this all top-down does not work as well as partnering with landowners to show that our definition of agriculture is much too narrow. When we think about agriculture in the 21st century and even transitioning to the 22nd century, we are talking about a bio-based economy, a green economy of being able to grow solutions for all the different kinds of inputs that we have, of being able to create ecosystems that are healthy, that create economic benefit, that save species, that create biodiversity. That is possible if we have the right set of incentives and we do partnerships with landowners. So the work that you do, remember, is related to water security that helps us achieve food security, that helps us take people out of poverty, and at the end of the day, will create world peace. Keep up the good work.
Gordon Burns has going to join us up here.
Good morning. It's great to be here. We're so fortunate to have Karen Ross as our Secretary for Agriculture, but I hate following her as a speaker. I was asked to give an overview of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and I'm going to do a non-technical overview. I know there are some panels that follow me that will be able to go into a lot more of the details, but what I'm going to try to do is sort of hit the highlights of the background leading up to the Act, the historical approach to managing groundwater in California, the Act itself, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, as it's affectionately called, and then put it in a little context at the end. So in California, we have some particular hydrologic challenges. One of them is geographic and hydrological, which is that we get our precipitation at the wrong place at the wrong time. We get most of it in the north, in the mountains, and most of the demand is in the south in the summertime. Also, we have a lot of annual variability. This is a terrific map that shows the variability nationwide of precipitation. The black, blue, and green dots are represents the most variable precipitation annually. The pink and yellow is the least. You can see it's kind of focused a lot on California. We have very variable precipitation. So we have this extraordinary series of water projects to store and convey water to get it where we need it, when we need it. that's been built up over the last century or so. And I'm sure you can recognize some of them. In yellow, it's the local, no, sorry. Green are the local projects, yellow are the federal projects, and red are the state projects. So you see this is the Los Angeles Aqueduct coming down from Mona Lake in the Owens Valley. Colorado. This is the East Bay, Hetch Hetchy. I can't see the colors from here very well, but anyway, hope I got those right? I do actually know them. On average, statewide, groundwater is about 35 to 65% of the supply, depending on surface water supplies. And as Secretary Ross said, in some communities, it's 100%. At the time that we were really contemplating going forward with groundwater management, we were also in the midst of a drought. And we had record low groundwater levels throughout the state. This is a map that the black dots represent historic places where there was historic lows in groundwater levels measured from about 1900 to 2014. We also have had tremendous population growth, which isn't going to stop anytime soon. We're at about 38 million people now. Notably, most of our major water infrastructure was built for a different population at a different time. And of course, also, as we'll talk about it, for a different hydrology. We've not necessarily housed that population in the best way from a water policy standpoint. This is a terrific picture from the New York Times last year showing some housing in the desert. That's desert on the right-hand side of the slide, and just over the backyard fences are swimming pools and lawns. We've also had extraordinary changes in agricultural demand. This is a slide from 1946. This is a UC Davis slide, actually. The green color is native vegetation, and you can see also what should be, can't see it from here, but some orange is citrus, the purple is vineyard, and then you don't see much pink, but pink would be native, or I'm sorry, nut and fruit deciduous crops. In 2010, the picture had really changed. Much less of the native vegetation, much more of the permanent crops. So flip through it again. And we don't, like with housing, we don't always put our agriculture exactly where we should from a water policy standpoint. But having said that, we shouldn't blame farmers for doing this. This is an area of rangeland that was cleared, and they're putting in permanent crops there, formerly unirrigated. But this isn't really the farmers' fault, right? The farmers are following the rules, and they are making rational decisions. The problem is that in the absence of somebody minding the store and paying attention to the common resource, we have a classic tragedy of the commons, where the sum total of all these rational decisions depletes the resource. In terms of future challenges, we have, in addition to population growth, we have climate change. And in California, there's some really interesting work out of Stanford. The problem isn't necessarily that we're getting less precipitation. We get about the same amount of precipitation, although it comes in different forms. But the problem is more about temperature. And with the climb in temperature, that tends to decrease our snowpack and increase our demand. And so from just a couple of decades ago, the chances of us having drought conditions in dry years has essentially doubled. This is a picture from a year ago, April, of an area in the Sierra where they take the end of the year snow surveys, one of the places where they take the snow surveys. And in an average year, there would be about 5 feet of snow here. Last year, of course, there was just no snowpack at all. And so this is where Governor Brown set up a press conference to announce some additional emergency drought measures. Our historical approach to groundwater is pretty extraordinary, considering how important it is to California. This is it. We had no real effective statewide approach. This is option one. Actually, there is a second option. It's the lawyers. You call in the lawyers, and they sue everybody in the basin, and then about 20 years later, they negotiate a basin management plan. And there are about 515 groundwater basins, according to the Department of Water Resources in California. There are about 30 that have been adjudicated through this judicial process, mostly in Southern California. And, you know, although it was a painful process with high transaction costs and not the ideal way to go about getting a groundwater management plan, those basins, for the most part, have done pretty well through the drought and are, I think, glad that they went through all that pain some time ago. So now we do have the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. It covers the most important basins, 127 of them. It relies primarily on local agencies to draft plans to manage the basins. It requires them to get to sustainable groundwater management in a 20-year timeline. We'll talk about that in a moment. And if they don't have adequate plans, which they need to show to the state agencies for evaluation, or if they don't make adequate progress towards sustainability in 20 years, then the state can intervene and impose its own plan. This is in part to help the locals get over their own local conflicts about how to manage groundwater. We know, of course, that this is a very contentious issue, but the one thing that the locals hate more than perhaps change and each other is the state. The Act defines sustainable groundwater management as the management and use of groundwater in a manner that can be maintained during the planning and implementation horizon without causing undesirable results. Now, all those terms are loaded and they're defined, but the point is that we understand, and the Act recognizes that groundwater goes up and down, it varies, but over time, over a 50-year planning horizon, it should more or less balance out, and you should manage it in a way that avoids bad things happening from overpumping it. And this is the list of bad things. The undesirable results that these plans are supposed to avoid are substantial and unreasonable lowering of groundwater levels, reductions in groundwater storage, seawater intrusion, land subsidence, and surface water depletions. So it's really an impacts test, right? You need to manage to avoid these impacts in the long term. Some key concepts from a policymaker standpoint about the legislation. Those 127 basins represent 92% of groundwater use and 88% of the population, so we really got most of it. The idea of local control and empowerment is very important. It gives sweeping authority to local agencies to regulate groundwater, and it does allow them to tailor their plans to their local needs and resources. And importantly, financing is a big issue here. A lot of the financing is going to have to come from locals. They need to be able to build consensus about what they want to pay for and what they're willing to do in the way of projects as opposed to demand management and other strategies. So it'll be different in each area. It wouldn't be nearly as effective if we tried to do all of this from Sacramento. The state does, though, impose uniform standards both through the statute itself and through regulations that the Department of Water Resources is putting out. I'm sure you'll hear more about that later. The state enforcement comes through the State Water Resources Quality Control Board, which can intervene under defined circumstances. And in the timeline, 20 years sounds like a long time, but when you think about the time that it takes to really to get consensus around projects, to plan them, to raise the financing for them, to construct them, and also to make the adjustments. In some communities where they will have to do quite a bit of demand management, they may want to develop groundwater markets like a lot of the adjudications have, but they also need time to make those adjustments, and we don't want to go from 60 to 40 miles per hour in a short time period with the jolting effect that has on the communities. This is the timeline. The DWR's regulations for the plan contents and the way that they will evaluate the plans just came out recently. And next step for the department is best management practices. In June 2017, not too long from now, local agencies need to have figured out how to organize themselves and formed governance that covers the entire basin. No basins are allowed to have unmanaged areas. If they do, then the state can intervene. And then they need to submit their plans either in 5 years or in 7 years, depending on whether or not they are currently designated as in long-term overdraft. And then they have 20 years from that date to actually achieve sustainability. Just some context at the end. Although this is landmark legislation and incredibly important, it really is just one piece of the puzzle. And Glenda referred earlier to the California Water Action Plan. We in the administration view water as a series of interrelated problems and interrelated solutions that we need to think about and approach from a coherent standpoint across agencies and across topics, because you can't really solve one problem without affecting another, and you want to, of course, use your resources wisely too. So the California Water Action Plan is sort of our blueprint or our agenda for approaching that sort of coherent path to sustainability. It doesn't necessarily get us all the way there, but as far as our administration goes, this is the start to try to get us on the right track. Groundwater was an important milestone, but we're trying to make improvements in all of these areas. And I just want to say that, to close, that California, especially considering how important groundwater is, has been incredibly irresponsible over its first 165 years in not really trying to regulate it and allowing ourselves to really get in a pretty deep hole. But we've shown also the ability over time to pull off big things, and I think SGMA itself is a testament to the fact that California can still make major policy adjustments, and we're finally behaving responsibly and stepping up to the plate. It'll be very hard, and it's going to be something that will have to evolve. I'm sure there will be a lot of conflict in the years ahead, but I firmly believe that 20 years from now, our biggest regret is going to be that we didn't start sooner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gordon. I think you're correct that starting sooner would have been very helpful. I have to admit, when I first moved to California from Colorado, I was kind of shocked that there was virtually no groundwater regulation. In Colorado and many of the western states, it is very strictly regulated and has been for over 100 years. So it is good to see California jumping on that. Now, most of the conversation thus far has been really around water quantity and management, but another key piece of that is water quality. And one of our challenging issues here in California, as elsewhere, is nitrogen. Not the only issue, but one of them. And to explore that a little bit with us is Perry Klassen.
Well, thank you, Glenda. Good morning, and it's good to be here today. And I follow Gordon in saying that that's a tough act to follow. First, we have the lead of the University of California, Department of Food and Agriculture, who's going to lead us to global peace, and then the undersecretary. Now you have a nectarine and peach farmer from Parlier. Are you ready for this? Okay, I'm going to start my presentation by asking the question that's in my title, Nitrogen Fertilization in Central Valley Crops. Are we doing it right? So the answer, of course, it depends on who do you ask this question of. You ask a farmer who's growing canning tomatoes and getting 65 tons an acre of high-quality fruit to the cannery for tomato paste, pasta, and other things. And his answer is going to be, of course I'm doing it right. My production tells the story. 30 years ago, I was getting 30 tons of tomatoes. That truck holds 40 tons. So every acre, these farmers are producing 65 tons of canning tomatoes very regularly. This is not anomalies. And he's going to surely say my production has a lot to do with the nitrogen fertilizer program that I use to create this crop. Then I'm going to talk. Then you ask an almond grower who's getting 5,000 pounds of almond nut meats per acre, tremendous amount of production. He had 2,500 pounds of almond nut meats a little less than 20 years ago. You ask that grower, am I doing it right? And of course he's going to say nitrogen fertilizer played a huge role in this production increase. And in both of these instances, you can say there's no doubt dramatic improvement in irrigation technology, pest management, the high technology irrigation scheduling programs we have. There's a lot of things. It's not just nitrogen fertilizer, but you are not going to grow 65 tons of tomatoes, 5,000 pounds of nut meats on 50 pounds of nitrogen fertilizer. However, if you ask the Regional Water Board, are we doing it right? The answer will probably no, of course not, you're not doing it right. This is a map of the Central Valley. You got Redding on the top, Bakersfield on the top. For those of you aren't familiar with our valley, that's about a 7.5 to 8 hour drive across that stretch of landscape. 7 million acres of irrigated cropland. So the Central Valley Water Board would say, of course not, you're not doing it right. Look at how many regions in the Central Valley where irrigated cropland is contributing to nitrates in groundwater. No, farmers, you're doing it wrong. So who's right? So there's no argument, though, that in this 7 million acres, there's tens of thousands of tons of nitrogen fertilizer applied to the cropland. Total, every year, we're putting on tons, millions of tons. We're using manures, we're switching to compost more and more, but those poundage alone are just a tremendous amount that we're adding. And then, yes, you go to these areas where you see those darker colors, and you're likely going to find, if you do the highest tech analysis of that water, you're probably going to find that nitrates from commercial agriculture are causing some of those problems. But we farmers and others in the Water Board will admit, too, there's going to be water treatment plant effluent that's contributing to that. There's also going to be tens of thousands of septic systems of rural residents that are scattered across this region. So the count is easily over 20,000 small residences that have rural septic systems, which of quality, who knows. And then there's legacy nitrates. I'm a farmer, grew up in Parley or Reedley area. My dad farmed there. My grandpa farmed down the road from there. What were they doing 30, 50 years ago with their nitrogen fertilizer applications? Fertilizer was dirt cheap in those days. So seemingly there's a lot of blame to go around for this nitrates in groundwater. So how do we best answer this question? Are we doing it right? Well, we're about to find out. In 2012, the Central Valley Regional Board ordered irrigated agriculture, represented by 13 coalitions, one of which I manage, to prove that their nitrogen fertilizing practices are protective of groundwater. We started field studies already this year in response to this mandate, and these studies are going to continue for at least 6 years, no doubt much longer than that, and they will be funded largely by growers, assessments of growers. Some folks in agriculture, myself, are looking forward at the end of this to handing data to the Regional Water Board that says, see, we're doing it right. Of course, I'm optimistic. I'm a glass half full kind of guy, but there's a lot of guys in agriculture, and ladies too, that say, I don't know. That data we're going to turn in may not show that we're doing the right things. And even though the Water Board doesn't like to hear this, 100% nitrogen use efficiency is just about impossible to accomplish. Those of you who have done the studies have seen that. And even in the most widely planted crop in the Central Valley, almonds, the studies have shown in the last 5 years that the best growers are doing well to get 80% nitrogen use efficiency. That's a little bit scary. And computer models might show that we can make great improvements in that. There's simply, as a grower, a risk-taking, there's a huge risk in us under-applying nitrogen fertilizer. Stone fruit, almonds, anything. When I was about ready to pick last week and my size was down, I couldn't put fertilizer on, nitrogen on, to try to bump up my size. There's just no way. I had to be applying my fertilizer in March and April to get the crop that I needed to harvest last week. So growers tend to err on the side of caution when it comes to fertilizing with nitrogen. It is a risk we can manage, since the biggest risk to us, to farmers, the weather and markets, we have no control over. So the trick is getting as close to the sweet spot as we can. So what does it mean when farmers are doing it right? So I'll make it, getting behind on my slides here. So what does it mean when we say we're doing it right? So as a nectarine farmer, peach farmer, it means I apply the right amount of fertilizer, the right amount rate that I need at the right time, not in the wintertime when it's about to rain, and the right place where the roots can take it up efficiently, and then the right nitrogen product. Nitrogen is not just nitrogen. There's a lot of formulations and such you can use. So if I follow each of these 4 R's, and I use good irrigation practices, it can bring me and any other grower as close as you can to be as getting it done right as possible. So for those of you who have not heard the term, the 4 R's are the right rate, right time, right place, and the right product. This is 4 R's are pretty widely known in the Midwest. Corn and soybeans have been working on this for a number of years, but this is now just beginning to make some pretty good inroads into California. And in my observation in agriculture for a lifetime and a career is that the almond and canning tomato industry is probably as close as we could be to doing it right at this point. And the growers that are following them are getting these kind of impressive yields that I was talking about earlier. And it's important is what growers are learning, and here's some data from the Almond Board and the University of California, is that growers are learning to match that nitrogen application to the crop uptake. Feed the plant when it's hungry. You're going to use that nitrogen more efficiently. The crop's going to put it to the best use and get the yields, the marketable yields, and the profit that we need so we can go back and farm again next year. Before we started doing some of these field studies, we started looking at the scientific literature that's out there, and one of the questions that we need answered for more and more crops is how much nitrogen does it take to produce a pound of, in this instance, nut meats. We need to understand that so we know when we decide and determine our nitrogen applications that we are putting the amount on of that crop that it needs to get the maximum amount of production without having leakage past the groundwater. So with the fertilizer practices that have been developed with the Almond Board, 65 pounds an acre is what's coming forward, is what's needed to grow 1,000 pounds of almond nut meats. That's what you eat and buy in the store. But what they also found is it's not 68 pounds, it's anywhere between 62 and 73. Of course, there's so many conditions that you have out there when you're growing, so it's a range. Now, I just want to mention, though, it cost about $1 million to come up with this answer. Probably even more. I'm just estimating what it is, but there was a lot of money spent to get this number close to it is. The other harder question, it was somewhat looked at in these studies, is then if you put 65 pounds of nitrogen on, how much is going into groundwater? So that's the question, of course, on this conference in the next few days, is to determine how do we measure that, how do we look at that. But of course, as we're finding, the answer not only depends on the 4 R's, but soil types. Soil types have a tremendous impact. Rainfall, irrigation management, extremely important. And then it comes on, there's a lot to do with this vadose zone. When I learned that term here a few years back, it sounds like the twilight zone. You know, what's going on in the vadose zone? Well, it's just about as mysterious as the twilight zone, because you can't stand here like a creek. I can look and watch that water going by, high sediment loads, pretty easy to tell. The vadose zone is invisible. In fact, you geologists, I have to give you credit. You have the best imaginations of any scientist to be able to picture what's going on in this very complex part of the earth. It's very important to understand that. So do the same 4 R's that I developed for nectarines, does that work when I have an impermeable layer? I've got hardpan on my ranch. Or when I have sand streaks, or what I have, what's going on down 50 feet, 100 feet, 10 feet below the root zone. So the one thing, though, that we have developed that I think is most important are the practices protective of groundwater. When we match that crop consumption curve, are we being protective of groundwater quality? So the question that the regional board is asking us, are your practices protective of groundwater, will be answered in a program called the Management Practices Effectiveness Program. MPEP is the new term that we're using in agriculture right now in the Central Valley. Water Quality Coalitions are combining efforts to support the PEP program, which will consist of field studies and computer modeling that will produce, I think, incredibly valuable information about nitrogen management practices and their impact on water quality. So we're going to study this nitrogen movement through the root zone using suction lysimeters. Some of you geologists say, wow, that's 30-year-old technology. Well, there's not a whole lot of new things going on besides suction lysimeters, and then soil coring of different depths to see what's going on down in that vadostone to try to understand better what might be moving past the root zone. And then this testing, this MPEP testing that we're going to be doing, we're going to be performing on multiple crops where growers use the best practices, things that they know, at least from an economic standpoint, are giving them the yields that they need. So we're going to evaluate the best. And if the practices are shown effective, we go out to growers and say, you're good to go. What you're doing now with these best practices is protective of groundwater. However, if they're not effective, then it's back to the field to refine the practices even further. We got to solve this problem. And I can't understate the enormity of this undertaking. What I just described in the last 2 minutes is something that's going to take all the best minds in this room and production agriculture to figure out what is going on, how do we improve our practices for all the reasons that Karen described, food security, world peace now. So it's important for us to understand that. So when at stake at this is our credibility with the water board, with the public, and especially our ability to continue farming and being in compliance with the California Water Code. So another huge challenge, though, is going forward is for the water quality coalitions, again, 13 of them in the Central Valley that I manage one of, is how do we reach our farmers with education on the new practices that we may have to have. My coalition, as you see here, we've got about 3,500 farmers, 690,000 acres spread across a 5-county area. That's just one of 13 coalitions. There's 7 million irrigated acres in the Central Valley. But our audience is I'll talk about mine alone. Of my 3,500 members, we've got guys that are using iPhones, satellite technology, all the way to growers that have their records on the dashboard of their pickup still. And that's not to criticize them. These are good farmers, salt of the earth sort of individuals. But then we come down to how are we going to communicate with these folks? 53% of my members have emails. At least they have email addresses they're going to give us. What are the other 47% using? Many of them are not using emails. They don't even have the ability to communicate in this way. So we all think, well, let's put it on a website, let's send them emails. Well, that's about half of my members. But the other thing is, so you reach them. That's one thing. But then how do you convince somebody that's been farming in the way he's farmed to change his practices? We're going to need this data. We're going to need solid information. I was talking yesterday in this panel. We love what you're doing in the Netherlands and Denmark and Israel and such, but we growers over here are show me individuals. You show me how it works in Parlier, on my nectarines. That's going to be the first step to convincing me. I don't think it's any different in the Netherlands and Denmark and Israel. You want studies done over there to provide the basis for making these changes. And we're going to be doing that education and outreach in conjunction with the commodity groups, very valuable in the Central Valley, as well as the University of California. All the farm advisors, the university research and such have done a great job in helping get us started on this. So the good news is that crops like almonds, corn, grapes, and walnuts make up about 80% of the irrigated acreage in the Central Valley. So improving nitrogen efficiency on just those 5 crops alone, that's a tremendous potential improvement in groundwater impacts if we can work on those. So here comes the hard question. Can we get a 10% improvement in that nitrogen use efficiency? I certainly hope so. But then here's the other one for you out to help us figure out. So then how do you track improvements? So do you measure groundwater nitrate levels? Yeah, that can take years to show changes. So do you measure tons of fertilizer sold? Well, if it decreases, does that mean there's less nitrate movement into groundwater? So if you measure nitrates in groundwater aquifers, where do you measure it? Where do you put these wells, or what wells do you use? What depth in the aquifer? Where is that well screened? Is it a shallow well or is it deep shell? I mean, it's all those kind of questions that you all understand. And then how often? Do we go out once a year, every 6 months, every 5 years? So how do we measure progress? That's a difficult question that we really hope from this meeting you get to give us some really good input on this. The water board would like to see us use shallow domestic wells surrounded by crops. So those wells have an extremely limited draw area. So yes, they will give us a good snapshot. It's the middle of my little 20 acres. What does it look like there? But 5 miles away, is there any influence on that well? Is it giving me trends that we need and the regulators need for determining progress? So the other one is how do we track the practices that growers are using that are shown to be protective? So these are all courses, these are all subjects that you're going to be talking about over these next couple of days in what I think is a very excellent groundwater session that you're probably on, Mr. Harder. I really appreciate that. And again, I do appreciate the chance to be here today. I wish you all the best in your endeavors and your studies and your work that will come together, and lots of good information, Thomas, that he's going to be helping us share with our coalitions. And I hope it can help me as a grower answer the question by saying, yes, I'm doing it right. Thank you for your time.
We've got some time left for some questions, which I have a few for the folks that hopefully will dig us into this subject just a little bit more. And the first one I want to throw out gets back to this idea of the changes in irrigation we've had. We've moved away from furrow and flood irrigation to much more efficient methods, which aren't recharging groundwater in the way they used to. So what does that mean moving forward as we look to balance the needs of the drought with groundwater management?
So I'll jump in and go first because I believe that what we need to do is just thinking about our total water budget and times of the year and a true conjunctive use model. And we've had great response of people thinking about times of the year to capture excess water, flood flows, whatever it might be, to recharge, specifically to do recharge. It flushes the soils, it captures water to help bring our groundwater basins into balance. We're in the process now of collecting good data because we don't want to create any unintended consequences of doing that. The UC has done a great job of the map that shows us the soils that are best for that. We've got great growers who stepped up immediately. They're partnering with the universities, with private companies, and with NGOs. This is really important. If we're going to start down this type of path, we have to make sure that all the stakeholders are a part of the process and feel that it's the right way of doing that. So I think being very intentional about recharge is an answer, and making sure, because we've seen as people have moved to very efficient on-farm water use practices, oftentimes that means they're doing groundwater pumping because their local irrigation district still delivers water once or twice a week, and here's the day. But we don't want to abandon that delivery system to be able to do this kind of recharge.
Yeah, I would add too that one of the really big challenges is the irrigation districts, and not in a negative way. And the irrigation districts that we have in the Central Valley primarily were developed in the 20s and 30s. They built these canals, they built these delivery systems to deliver water to my farm when the dams had water in their reserve at this certain time of the year. Recharge needs to occur at a time when late spring when the water's flowing off of the snow melts. So the challenge is, I've got nectarines, my neighbors have almonds that are blooming. Do we want water out in that field when we have these high flows? Some of us don't want water in those fields at that time because of fungus concerns and other things. But there's also systems that the districts that are looking at just charging up the canal systems themselves. There's thousands of miles of canals. Put a foot or 2 foot of water in that canal system throughout. That is a tremendous recharge. So it's good that the conversation's being brought up. It is a challenge, though, from an irrigation district's perspective to be able to practically handle this and do this correctly. But, I applaud the efforts that have been started, at least to begin these conversations of utilizing this as a resource for recharge.
I'd just add, this is really the point of SGMA. You want to look at a basin and look at how to keep it in balance, and if there's going to be less recharge from flood irrigation, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but collectively the folks overlying that basin and the local agencies that are the designated SGMA agencies need to figure out how to recharge it and how to use the surface and groundwater that they have available conjunctively. I guess I would add that the trend toward water use efficiency is presumably not a short-term trend. It's a long one. It's driven by cost and nutrient management and bunch of other things. So it's an adjustment that we'll have to make, and over-irrigating crops is not necessarily the best way to recharge anyway. You might have system losses, evapotranspiration. Now I'm getting into technical stuff. I'm a lawyer, right? So, but presumably you all back me up on this. In any case, you technical folks should help the districts figure out how to most cost-effectively keep these basins in balance.
Great. So that was the kind of easy warm-up question.
Yeah, well, jumped on that.
Now we'll move into some more political questions. and one is a real biggie. SGMA's fairly new, and it allows a 20-year timeline for implementation. However, if the current 5-year drought continues, perhaps even worsens, God forbid, will that process be enough, or are we going to potentially need to look at additional state intervention? And nobody's jumping on that one, are they?
Well, I will, but I'll let Kevin go first.
During the drought, we have heard some calls for SGMA to be accelerated. I personally am not inclined toward that. I think that the timelines in SGMA make a lot of sense. SGMA was never designed to be a response to this drought. It's a long-term solution to a long-term problem. And I think that if you really look at what's going on in the basins right now, and the local agencies trying to put together the governance, they're struggling. There's some of it's going well, some of it's not going well. They've only got less than a year left to meet that deadline, and then from there they've got just 3 years in some cases, or 5 years to draft plans, highly technical plans for which a lot of them are lacking a lot of data. So I don't think it's realistic, really, to just think that accelerating SGMA is an answer. However, if there continues to be a drought, then the government is going to have to continue to respond to the drought, as we have been, with ways to mitigate it, food boxes, to help communities, policy changes to help accelerate conjunctive use projects. We might have to tailor responses to things that are particularly bad or harmful in specific areas, like subsidence around the aqueduct has been a big concern lately. But that's the kind of thing that government does every day, is come up with solutions to current problems.
And there have been some calls in the legislature, particularly around land use and planting decisions, which have not gone very far. The most important thing that government can do from a policy point of view, and the governor has done this repeatedly through the use of executive orders, is one, making sure that disadvantaged communities who have gone, like they've gone from perhaps impacted quality of groundwater to no water for drinking, making sure that we have the mechanisms in place to make sure that our disadvantaged communities have drinking water. Secondly, there's so much more we can do on water use efficiency. Every one of us as Californians, that's the #1 goal, although our water action plan has 10 different strategies. Goal #1 is that we as Californians have an ethic of using every drop of water preciously. I've just come back from Israel. I can't tell you how for the first time in my life I really felt like water is life. They live their life around how they use water, and we have a lot more we can do in that. The use of recycled water, in particular for landscaping, understanding where it can be used for growing crops. There's so much more we can do, and in this last executive order, the governor has called for improved data being reported on water use efficiency from urban management agencies as well as agricultural water agencies. We know that there's more we can do with extending on-farm water use efficiency. Our SWEEP program, which is the statewide water efficiency and enhancement program, which has been funded with cap and trade dollars, has the last call for $18 million of projects that's really improving water use efficiency on the farm. So we have to look at all of the tools, not one thing, and thinking that there's a silver bullet.
Yeah, I want to dig into this just a little bit more, because Gordon touched on the need to interact with the communities. So there has been some speculation that due to long-term groundwater overdraft, combined with future droughts that are expected, and just the potential permanence of some of this due to climate change, that it's possible, there's a possible scenario where up to 10 to 20% of the irrigated land in the San Joaquin Valley may have to be retired, as much as 1 million acres. If something like that were to occur, what option is California exploring to help those communities make that very large transition in land use and economic and everything related to it?
Okay, guys, don't all jump at the microphone at the same time. Perry, do you have the answer? So, first of all, that is speculative. We know that agriculture is very adaptive and that there's already fallowing on a yearly basis in certain irrigation districts now, part of it because of subsidence issues. So they do fallowing on a rotational basis, so not the same landowner every year is, no one's permanently. However, in the Westlands district, they permanently retired significant acres. They're exploring, we have a very bold goal for renewable energy, and they're exploring installation of wind or solar and really looking at being energy producers. And we have, through the drought executive order, we've been able to leverage some dollars through the emergency funds there with workforce development dollars from the feds to really identify there are farm jobs and food processing jobs that are not being filled now because we need new, ever-changing technical skills. It's not just coming into the workforce and this is what I can do, and it's creating, in some cases, better paying jobs and really focusing on that. We've got great programs through the community colleges in the Central Valley in particular that have really identified 5 or 6 categories of jobs that with some additional hours of training, people can get a certificate in irrigation management, the new watering systems. You have to make sure it's not just the landowners that are involved here, it's making sure the employees have the skills to make sure those systems are operating as efficiently as possible. We have new food quality laws that are coming into place, and that's going to require a lot of new skills training. So there are those kinds of mechanisms that we're doing, but there's no grand plan that I'm aware of.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I guess I would be cautious about laying out a scenario like that in the long term. There just seem to be so many variables. Who can predict exactly what's going to happen with the Delta, for example? That's going to be a big deal. I think I don't know how many people would have predicted 20 or 30 years ago the changes we're seeing in permanent crops and the trends there. So I think SGMA is actually one mechanism where a lot of these things get worked out at the local level, really what sort of mix of supply and demand management and the implications that those communities work out for their irrigated agriculture is sort of the starting point. But economic development and bond funds and programs and policy changes are things that will always be on the table for addressing the problems that come with that.
Great. I want to change direction a little bit and pull Perry into this conversation. How is SGMA interacting with and dealing with water quality regulations moving forward? We heard some from Perry, but a little more detail on that.
Well, here's the classic scenario. I've got, in the East San Joaquin Coalition, 9 SGMAs being formed, groundwater sustainability authorities. I went to 2 meetings of one, and I asked a question, and this is probably not characteristic of all of them, but I said, well, so what role would you see the coalitions playing? Well, you're going to provide all the groundwater data, right? So I said, well, I was thinking the same thing about you all. No, I think that really these two irrigated lands program and SGMAs are going to merge eventually. But what's happening right now is the authorities have to be established. This is the SGMAs are the cities, the irrigation districts, and agriculture. So those 3 have really locally need to figure out, so to speak, who's boss, who's running it, what's the authority, how are we going to structure this? I think in a couple of years, once these start getting settled down, then we're going to all figure out our roles a little better. And that's a generic statement about, similar to what somebody said to me once, if you say what you think a farmer thinks, you're wrong, because there's farmers that will give you every opinion from here to there. Same thing with SGMA. You go to a SGMA organization in the Kings River Basin, it's entirely different from Modesto, it's different from Redding. so they're not all on the same track. They're all kind of moving at a little bit different speed. They all see their deadlines coming forward. So that's going to influence a lot when they merge together. One thing that was not brought up that I kind of shudder to think of how this is going to work is we have a salt and nitrate management plan, basin plan coming forward that's out of the recycled water policy. That's almost a third track, and there was a little bit of talk about it yesterday, but that's a water quality driven issue for cities and agriculture that needs to fit in with a Sigma approach. So the next 5 years are definitely going to be very interesting in California as we try to sort out all of these issues. But at the end of the day, we've got to be able to continue growing, providing food, and being an economy that's the driver of, I think, the United States in a lot of ways. When you think about where's your garlic and onions and tomatoes come in, almonds and such, pretty much from the Central Valley. So there's an important food source here that we've got to figure out the future of.
Any other thoughts?
Just, I agree that that there needs to be some merging of some of these functions, and it would make a lot of sense to do so, especially in data sharing, figuring out the best way to get accurate data and to share it across agencies for multiple purposes. But I would point out that Sigma was never intended to add a new regulatory structure for groundwater quality. It's about planning, and it's about planning specifically of the impacts of groundwater pumping on water quality. The state has, as Perry well knows, very broad authority to regulate water quality under Porter Cologne and other important laws, and Sigma was not intended to replace that.
And I just want to add, and his mention of recycled water, it is probably one of the biggest resources we have. Wastewater is not wastewater. It's a molecule of water that can be treated. It's not inexpensive, but it's wet. And we have to be much more focused, and I think we've started to take those steps with some of the streamlining that's happening with the State Water Resources Control Board. But we really need to work with other places that utilize their recycled water and treated wastewater even more than we do, to make sure that we understand all of the potential impacts of that. We're poised to use more recycled water in agriculture at the same time that we're implementing the Food Safety Modernization Act, which has some very strict water quality criteria in it. But other countries are doing this. We just need to pull the data together and try to be ahead of the curve with some of the new pharmaceutical issues and antibiotics and hormone issues that are just now being identified, to make sure that this is, in fact, a resource that can be safely used, whether it's for food production, but especially for landscaping uses. We really need to maximize our use of that. It does require an infrastructure investment, but I think it's one that will bring great returns for us if we start with that now.
Well, that opens up a good question, particularly from the University of California's perspective. What do you see as some of the key research needs moving forward? Where do we really need to be targeting some of that research effort, and not just for UC, for a variety of partners? This idea of uptake of what might be in recycled water. I was just down at UC Riverside, and one of their research projects was looking at the endocrine disruptors and how it uptook into citrus trees. Concerned. Not sure there's a problem yet, but looking at it. So what other kinds of research, and maybe some of that research isn't just about ag production, similarly helping local communities implement Sigma and the other laws and find those solutions. What kind of research and efforts do you see needed there?
I'll always start. So I think there needs to be research to get into the consumer's head to convince them that recycled water products are safe, if they are in fact safe. If they are, the public perception of use of recycled water, of anything that's close to what they eat or what they are around, I think is a huge hurdle. I think that's the thing you brought up about pharmaceuticals. There's also a huge issue in Kern County right now with reuse of water that's been pumped out of the ground with oil production. It has some infinitesimally small molecules, which you all know in the room, we're at the part per quadrillion now that we can analyze. I mean, does that mean anything? Because the consumers, the activists will say, oh my gosh, you have a quadrillion part of this in the water, and it's in your food too. Does that mean anything? I guess if it does, then the research needs to prove that and get that word out. Same thing, if it doesn't mean anything, we need to understand that, and the consumers need to understand that. I think the direction of research needs to look at the consumer and their understanding of the products that we make and the dangers that we pose. If they are in fact dangerous, prove that. If not, then we need to look at modern society. We have, what was the population now, 45 million people in the state, 40 million. It's an enormous consumer out there that needs to have, they want more and more information all the time. And I think the technologies of communication out there now, YouTube and such, have passed the networks and others. They left them in the dust, but they are also very useful in getting this sort of information out. And the University of California has a tremendous competency and trust that I think people can rely on to prove this information or distribute this information.
Well, I think there are tremendous data needs related to Sigma, and in particular around those undesirable results, right? Those impacts that they're supposed to avoid. And to really do that and to come up with plans that work, you need reliable data on things like subsidence and the nexus between groundwater and surface water interaction. So, and you need trustworthy data that people can really believe is true, so that they don't argue about the data and prevent them from actually talking about what to do. Additionally, there's really interesting work going on with conjunctive use projects, flooding agricultural land in winter. A number of projects, including some by UC Davis this last winter. And there's a really interesting, I think, nexus there. If those work out and if they aren't showing water quality problems or other issues like that, potentially that could be a real good launching point for some policy changes to help enable those kinds of things.
So let me add to the long list for which you have no funding. So a couple of things that haven't been mentioned. One is coming back to this issue of drinking water and these very, very small communities that don't have the resources where we, and you know this as a former rural development director, where we can invest in the capital to upgrade systems that need to be modernized, but it doesn't fund the O&M. And we know that there's cloud technology, there's very large water systems in the state that could offer some of that assistance, but really looking at, if it's not consolidation, what's available that could allow those systems to make sure that every citizen in the state has drinking water. So that would be one, to really look at that. I would also say that with the continued advancement of technology and all the regulatory changes, it's a lot of technology, which means it requires a lot of high touch with farmers, because we have farmers of every size, every resource, multiple languages. If ever there was a time to expand cooperative extension, that is the adoption model that still works, folks. And a lot of that's been commercialized. You can partner with commodity groups and with coalition groups, but there's still a need for that framework of people with that kind of expertise of how to work on the field with farmers to do that. I would say that we know, and you brought this up, I'm very interested in the treatment of brackish water, even mobile on-farm brackish water. What could we do to treat on-farm brackish water so that it's useful water? There's still going to be a waste issue, but what kinds of technologies are available that are cost-effective and efficient to help with smaller scale and of course, larger scale desal to make it more efficient, more effective, and minimize the environmental impact of that. Little things, Glenda, just little things.
Well, actually, maybe you or Gordon could take a second and explain a little bit of what the state is trying to do to facilitate innovative technologies. There's at least one or two programs, and I think even some funding, is there not? There's the new water innovative technologies.
Yeah, is that through the CEC? Yeah, I think most of that is happening through the California Energy Commission because of the nexus of water and energy, and it has a track record with the standards that they've developed for appliances and other energy efficiencies. That's been a part of that. And then I don't think there's anything at GoBiz, but maybe there is. I'm really sorry. I've been so focused on farm water use efficiency and the SWEEP program. and what DWR is doing to provide grants to the water districts themselves to modernize their systems. But I know that CEC has some great programs, and I think that's where most of that innovation work is happening.
There is. Well, and actually at a national level, the National Science Foundation just recently announced a FUSE, Food, Energy, Water Nexus.
Yeah.
And they're putting some fairly substantial research dollars out there. In fact, we have a large proposal from UC in there to expand a system that I know you and I at least are fairly fond of, the rural-urban connection strategy, which is part of what is being looked at in next week at that an ecosystem services workshop, which CDFA has done a great deal of work on how ecosystem services could be part of, well, is producing on agricultural production and could be even more. So maybe just a moment on what you have been doing with CDFA, ALMI's work on ecosystem services, and elsewhere in the state there's a lot of interest in looking at that too as a different way to incentivize solutions.
Well, there are in some parts of the country, there are nutrient trading markets that are starting to happen. Utilities are very involved in doing work upstream to have cleaner water coming downstream. So just like water trading needs to make huge advancements, but there again we need data and transparency. I think nutrient trading offers some potential services that could be available, but it comes back to really thinking in a more holistic way, not just parking agriculture in this one industrial thing. When we think about how dependent it is upon nature and the environment to do what we do on the land, then we have to be honest and say we get more than just the crop that gets harvested once a year from that land. And how it's managed can contribute even more positively to the type of environment that Californians in particular value, but it's becoming also an important part of communicating to consumers who are more interested in the whole picture of how was that produced, where was that produced, who's producing it. And so being able to document what we're doing with regard to this whole wheel of ecosystem services is especially important. So water use efficiency, biodiversity, pollinator habitat, all those kinds of things that farmers just do. It's being very intentional and being able to use the data we've collected to communicate that to consumers. We need a broader base of people who understand and support the policies then that will allow farmers to continue to do that.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? So that brings up both for local communities and farmers, all the different players who are trying to implement SGMA. So what do you see as some of their key challenges, and how might we all, the research, government, coalitions, et cetera, how might we make it a little easier to deal with those challenges?
Take it away, Cory.
Well, I think if you look at the experience of the adjudicated basins, which is probably our closest analogy, a lot of them evolved. They didn't get it right from the beginning, and they really took a while to hammer out broad consensus around how to govern themselves, what the underlying data is, how to fund projects, what projects needed to be funded, and how to solve their problems. So I personally think that the agencies that are going to most succeed in SGMA are the ones that really do broad outreach and take the time to build consensus and foundational things like putting together a strong governance structure, like making sure that everybody trusts the data and they have quality data, and that they have good conversations about the trade-offs of different solutions. I think that the ones that try to cut corners and just sort of speed forward without really taking the time to build that kind of consensus are asking for trouble.
Okay. I see we have a question in the back there. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm opening it up right there.
There's a hand right there.
Well, no, there's somebody with a microphone.
Oh.
Oh, you're just handing out the
it's right
microphone.
over
Sorry,
here.
so here's one right here.
I'm the hander outer.
Yeah, right.
Sorry. I thought you were getting ready to ask one.
I could, but I think you got plenty.
Well, thank you for your comments, especially I love the comments about California's role in providing safe and quality food for the country and the world. So in relation to that is, is there an opportunity especially since California now is going to be fair, we're going to have $15 minimum wage, which I think is great, and it's going to be sustainable by definition in a period of time. To have a carrot, have incentive for growers to embrace this by having like a fair and sustainable campaign, where we actually, if growers share data and embrace this, then maybe they get some type of certification or part of the team type of thing where we can go out to the world where we are producing both a fair and sustainable product that's safe and high quality, because we don't live in a vacuum. There's Mexico to our south, and there's Arizona and Texas to our east, who aren't, us in New York are the only producing states in the country at $15 minimum wage coming for agriculture, which is great empowerment for people of color and the farm. But, how can we provide incentive for people to embrace this? Because we are going to do the right thing. Thank you for your time.
So the closest we have, I love that idea, and that's part of communicating and bringing everyone together to communicate that. Here's the blessing and burden of my world. We have 800 organizations who are registered to lobby and be an advocate for agriculture. That's a good thing, but they don't all agree on approaches. Our best platform for that, quite truthfully, is California Grown. From the beginning, I felt that California Grown, when you travel the country and you travel the world, embedded in that is green, is healthy, is nutrition. And so it's can we make that program help communicate that more fully, and can we get more California ag groups and individual farmers and retailers and food service to step in and pay a royalty to help advance that. We're actually seeing more growth and interest from retailers and restaurants than we are from farm groups. Each farm group has its own marketing thing, the way they're going to market. But I believe we can turn what we do as a state, because we value environmental performance and fair wages, whatever it is. We need to turn that around and be a positive as why we should be the preferred source and buy from us. But there hasn't been a lot of agreement in the ag sector for that. I have the California Grown program. We dedicate some specialty crop dollars to that, and I'd love to grow that program. So thanks for the idea. I'm going to get your card. I'll be calling you.
Great. Another question from the audience? Right back there.
Good morning. Dan Monk, UC Cooperative Extension in Fresno County, and I work in an ag education program with growers, and I will tell you that I think there's been tremendous improvements in grower knowledge for irrigation management, more recently nutrient management, and there's been good support for that work, and a real change there. But remember, we only have a very small percentage of our population that's ag educated. And I wonder, going forward, if we're going to be changing policy and doing the good thing, the right thing going forward, don't we need a better understanding of the general public have a better understanding of what agriculture does, the amount of water it uses or requires, the amount of water that consumers really ultimately consume when they're sitting at the table, wearing those cotton jeans, or whatever it is that they're drinking that glass of milk. So I guess my question is how are we going to move forward with sustainable groundwater management, with sustainable water nutrient management, without the public's understanding of what agriculture does? And I guess the larger, maybe the point I could make is without compulsory secondary education. And is that a dream, or is that something that we could actually make happen in our school systems?
Wow.
So there is ag in the classroom, and there is curriculum that actually has been approved. It's gone through the Department of Education. I think there was an effort to mandate ag literacy a number of years ago. I'm not aware of anything in recent times. Again, I'm not trying to shift this to others, but there are 800 organizations that advocate for agriculture. If they got together with other stakeholders who saw the public benefit of this, maybe they should try that again. But you have to bring in all the perspectives. We have some curriculum for environmental education. The school garden programs are really integrating food, ag, science, art, culture into it. So there's a lot of efforts, but there's not one effort. So I don't have an answer for that because it takes a lot of people to agree that this is the one thing we're going to make our priority this year. Sorry.
Yeah, and I would say the lack of knowledge about agriculture is part of a much larger problem throughout our culture of scientific illiteracy. And that's one reason, one of the new things we're doing at UC Cooperative Extension is actually urging our folks to speak more science to policy, not to go in and say, this is what I think, this is what you ought to do, but to at least go in and say, this is what the science shows, here's the data, and to do it in plain English, which is something Cooperative Extension is much better at than the average scientist, I have to say. But, you know, that's a really big issue, not just for groundwater and ag and this and that and the other. It's really scientific illiteracy in our population in general affecting a lot of policy making. Anybody else want to comment on that or any thoughts?
I just point out this. I mean, this is a continuous problem, and it takes different forms. During the drought, you know, there's been there are frequently these sort of factoids that get tossed out there. Agriculture takes 80% of the water and that kind of thing that are really challenging to deal with because obviously the real issues around that are so much more nuanced and important, but it's very difficult to have a nuanced debate during a crisis and when people are trying to use bumper sticker slogans for political purposes. So you know, it's helpful, obviously, for folks like the governor to speak up as he has to defend agriculture and try to make those points. But I totally agree that it'd be really useful for people to have a better understanding of science and of agriculture and the benefits that it provides.
So unfortunately, we have run to the end of our time. I want to ask all of you to help me in thanking our panel who've done a really great job up there.